here for a special event. As you all should be aware, we have an assignment that has been issued that compares different ministries in the church. We're all gathered here today to listen to the account of one person's ministry. Today we have two gentlemen from Year 8 who will be conducting and comparing the interview with Brother Michael Ryan. That's Matthew Manelli and Dylan Porter. I'd now like to hand over to the boys to begin proceedings.
Good afternoon, teachers, students, and Brother Michael Ryan. There are many ministries in the church, sisters, brothers, and non-diocesan priests who choose to live as members of a community that follows specific traditions or is spiritually patterned after a member of the community which they follow. They work in the service of others, living a life which is totally dedicated to God. They work for the honour of God, the building up of the church, and the care of God's people. Brother Michael Ryan became a brother in 1960. He started teaching at Sutherland in 1965. In 1967, Brother Michael moved back to his home state of Queensland, where he predominantly taught in schools until 2008, when he moved to the monastery here at Edmund Rice. Today, we will learn about the life as a brother, and we thank Brother Michael for sharing his story with us. Coming around now are some images associated with Brother Michael's life. I would now like to pass the microphone to Brother Michael to introduce himself to us.
Thanks very much. I just would like, by way of introduction, I think you'll find out more about me in detail as we go on, but I'd just like to give it a bit of context, overall context to what we're doing today, and that is, in the first instance, to talk about the fact that it involves the religious life, because I'm a member of a religious, or as it's sometimes called, the consecrated life. This way of life is recognised within the church in official capacity and is governed in part by canon law, which means church law, is based upon the fact that you have individual people responding to a vocation, or in other words, a call to follow God's will by imitating Jesus in a close manner, and to make that the priority in their life. And what characterises this state of life is the fact that the members take vows, solemn promises, just like people do when they get married. They take solemn vows to one another. These vows are made to God in the presence of a representative of the church. our actions. Now, within that concept of the religious life, you've got the Christian brothers, because Edmund Rice, when he founded his schools, decided that he needed to have a congregation of brothers, religious brothers, to help him run the schools and see that they continued. Now, with the Christian brother, there are two aspects that we should be mindful of, and that is that this is, in a personal sense, this person has a relationship with God. They've responded to what they feel is a call from God to serve Him in this way of life and doing the works of the congregation, so that there is also not just the personal concern of the person themselves, but also their work or their ministry, as it's called. And with the Christian brothers, that has predominantly been throughout our history, just over 200 years, the evangelisation of youth. Now there's a nice long word for you, evangelisation. It literally means to teach young people how to live life according to the gospel. The word evangelium is the Latin word for gospel. And gospel means good news. Gospel is the English word that translates the Latin word evangelium. We get some of our words relating to the gospel from that Latin root. So, the third point that I'd like to make at this stage is the historical situation in Australia with regards to education. Back in the 19th century, Irish immigrants came to Australia. Some of them came out as convicts to start with, and were later then released from their bondage and became settlers. But there were also other Catholic immigrants, and there was a need for education. However, in the 1880s, the Australian governments, they were colonies at the time, but principally in New South Wales, Henry Parkes was responsible for passing the law which provided for a free secular education in government-run schools. And the Australian bishops saw that secular education, which ignores religion, was inadequate, that they needed schools which taught in a framework of faith education, belief in Christ. And so they turned to the religious orders of Europe to send out members to staff our schools. And religious people cost less than lay people because they have a stipend, not a wage, and it was much easier to staff schools. And hence you have the Christian Brothers from Ireland and also Marist Brothers and De La Salle Brothers from France, for example, and also the Salesian priests from Italy. They are among the leading orders to come to Australia. So that's the background to what we say for the rest of the time. Thanks.
Thank you, brother. We would like to ask you some specific questions about your life as a brother. Firstly, what were the steps that you had to go through to become a brother?
When I was at school, the brothers were running many schools, and so they had brothers specifically appointed to travel around to the schools throughout Australia and New Zealand to seek vocations. And this man was called the postulator. He used to come around and ask us if we wanted to be brothers. Back in those days, pretty well all our staff were brothers. I was taught by brothers all through my schooling, except for one lay teacher who was a French teacher from Canada. But other than that, it was all brothers. So there were plenty of brothers around for us to be influenced by them, by their activities, their skills and their ideals. And so I responded to that, and I went to Strathfield, where the training houses were for the brothers, and I went to the juniorate, which meant I did the leaving certificate there, and then the next year, in 1960, I went to the novitiate, the first year of novitiate, because there was also a second year which was conducted out at Mulgoa. So we were out in the country away from the city, because we were being trained in a spiritual fashion. Then at each year we made vows which were temporary. They were just for 12 months until we were 25 years of age, and we were able then to make final profession forever. So those were the steps of training that I went through in the period before my final profession. I had studied at Sydney University for a Bachelor of Arts degree, and also I had taught at Sutherland, St Patrick Sutherland and St Patrick Strathfield. So, and then by the end of 1966 I was finally professed as a brother forever.
Thank you, Brother. Brother Martin, what do you think are the best things about being a brother?
These are many and varied, and I hope I can hit on a few. Because of the spiritual and religious nature of our vocation, the fact that I've been able to do renewal periods away from the classroom on a number of occasions has been very significant. One of which was in 1983, I spent 5 months in Rome with a group of brothers from all over the world, and we did spiritual training and renewal there, because since we've been in the novitiate we've had the Second Vatican Council who instituted new ways of looking at things at the world, the modern world, for the church, and we needed to be updated, as it were. In 2003 I had another opportunity to go to Wales, and there I spent 3 months in another spiritual renewal type of activity, part of which was a 30-day retreat on total silence. So it was very serious business, and that's, I think, the supreme benefit of being with the brothers is the attention to the spiritual needs of the person and their response to the vocation that God gives them. Because in fact their ministry is built upon the work, the spiritual development that they undergo. And so you can't really have the ministry of teaching in schools and without this spiritual base. It's like the generator or dynamo that gives energy to the work that you do as a minister in your ministry. Besides that, there's life in community, because we lived together as brothers, and I was in a community of 21 brothers at one stage. I've been in another one of about 13, and all the way down as the time has gone by to just 2 of us here at Wollongong. But in all of that, you have shared ideals. You've got the example of good men. You've got the challenge that they offer to you to keep living the way you should, to keep up to the highest standards. And then also the process of brothering that goes on, by which I mean the acceptance and the assistance that you get from those brothers that you're living with. And also the wider community of the brothers throughout the province and indeed the whole world, because there's impact from all of that on you as a brother. And so there's a great chance to develop esprit de corps, that is, if you like, team spirit. It's something that has helped me very much over the years, and kept me on my toes too at times, I might tell you. And as St. Augustine said, a brother helped by another brother is like a strong city. So they would be my best features, I think, of being in community. the fact that I've also met inspirational people in that circumstance, as I say, has been a great way of keeping up my spirits.
Thank you. Our next question is, what do you believe are your greatest achievements or accomplishments?
I'm not going to talk about achievements as such, because I think that it's a hard thing to put a finger on, particularly when you're a teacher, because as Edmund Rice said, you sow the seed now and it grows up in the lives of the boys later on. So what I'm going to talk about really are times of satisfaction, is what I would say, or how I would term it anyway. Often I see this in the lives of other boys, or boys that I've had in the past in school. Last year was the 60th year of St Patrick's College at Shorncliffe in Brisbane, where I was for 10 years, and 6 of which I was the principal. And I attended a number of celebrations on that occasion during that year, one of which was for a gathering of the school captains, as many as they could get from past years. And it was wonderful to see fellows I knew at school who, after living through many years from school, but were still in admiration of the school and what it did for them. And I think that was a point of satisfaction that I received. Sometimes you see them in public life on the TV. I've seen chaps I've taught in school performing on the TV news particularly, carrying out functions that are important for the success and safety of our society. I've seen also one about the other night, a lad I had at St Lawrence's College in South Brisbane, where I was for a total of 16 years. His face just popped up on the screen and I knew him straight away. I've also enjoyed the success day of people who perhaps have studied law. One of the men I had at St Joseph's Gregory Terrace in Brisbane, he's now a judge in the law courts, and that's quite an achievement for him, and I feel satisfaction from his success. I was involved with sports coaching all throughout my time, rather teaching in schools, because all the schools that I taught at always had a Saturday sport, not during the week but on the weekends. And some of these men have gone through to national representation, and one by the name of Cooper Cronk, all he knows about that grade 8 French is what I taught him. We didn't practice field goals or anything, but he did that somewhere else. I think one of the achievements, I suppose I'd call this, is that as a brother I've spent many years, and when I went into the classroom, my most important job was always the religious education class. That was my prime concern, my highest priority. And I know when I started off, I began to preach a hell of a lot to the boys and tell them what the church said and what they should be doing. But by the time I reached the later years of my teaching, I'd mellowed somewhat and realised that the world was different from what it had been, and that I needed to be more of a listener, more of someone who worked with the students rather than dictated so much to them. And I think to navigate that transition was an achievement.
Thank you, brother. What kind of work have you done since becoming a brother, and where have you worked?
Well, I have taught school. As I said, studied before I went into the classroom, and I then started my teaching in Sydney, Sutherland, and then at Strathfield. But then I was changed to St Joseph's College, Nudgee in Brisbane, and at the end of that particular year, which was 1967, Queensland was cut off from New South Wales as part of a province. It became a new province in its own right. And so I was part of the Queensland province of Christian Brothers, no longer part of the St Mary's province, which was based in Sydney. So I taught then in schools in Brisbane. I had 10 years, as I said, at Shorncliffe, where I was principal as well for 6 years. I would then move to St Joseph's Gregory Taurus for 4 years, and was involved in the academic work there, mainly as I was an English teacher, a French teacher, a religion teacher, of course, and a couple of sundry other things, like business principles and a bit of science here and there, a bit of history and a bit of geography, but those were the subjects that I taught. And the sports I was engaged in extracurricular time were cricket and rugby, and well, in some of the schools I was also caught up in track and field athletics. So they were the types of works I was doing at the time. After Gregory Terrace, I went to St Lawrence's for 2 years on the south bank of the Brisbane River. Then I went for 3 years to Queensland to Abergavenny College, which was 40 kilometres away from the nearest shop, because it was a boarding school founded for agricultural purposes, and that was quite remote. After 3 years there, I came back to St Lawrence's for another 14. Then I was involved once again in all those subjects and sports that I spoke about. So subsequently then, at the end of the year 2000, I was asked to go to Melbourne, which is about 3 hours from Brisbane in a northwesterly direction, because at Melbourne there is an Aboriginal community, and it used to be a sort of reserve, but of course those things have been cancelled now. And this was turned into an Aboriginal settlement with its own regulations and council. But there were quite a number of students there that when I got to early secondary, they couldn't stand going into the local high school. It was just too much for them. They became disengaged from school. And so it was our job there to round up these children, bring them into school, give them some breakfast, and then try to impart some learning to them. And I did that work for 18 months, and I say that was satisfaction for me, time of achievement, I feel, because it was so different from what it would be like teaching you fellows here in a mainstream school. It brought me into contact with the Aboriginal people for the first time. Subsequently to being converted from 2002 to 2007, before I came down here, I was on the leadership team of the Queensland Province of the Brothers. So I was involved with the province administration throughout the state, into the Northern Territory, and also into East Timor, which is all part of our province. And in that capacity, I also was involved with the committee Australia-wide over all our 4 provinces, which was involved with the Ministry of Indigenous People. So I got further involved with Indigenous people and came to understand much more about them and how we can easily misunderstand them. So that's the sort of work I've done and where I've taught.
Thank you, brother. Have you ever met or worked with any inspirational people? If so, how have they inspired you or others?
Well, I think that I have to admit that the inspiration I've received has been mainly from Christian brothers, starting from my school days. The second principle of Edmund Rice poetry was CBC Wollongong in Crown Lane, ultimately taught me in my last year of school, and he was very inspiring indeed, appreciated extremely what we were doing at the school. So, and also then, of course, in the later years where more lay teachers came into our school, there were many inspirational people there, particularly with their educational insights and their readiness to modernise things and move things along for us, so that students might be better served as times change.
Thank you, brother. How is your life as a brother? A life of service?
I think this is probably the most crucial point of the whole gathering, so I think if you've drifted off a little bit and just got to settle in and listen a bit more closely. I spoke to you about earlier on about how my attitude to students changed over time, and I think that was from being a type of preacher or a herald to that of a servant or someone who listened and walked with students. And I think that's because I was making the students and their personal growth the single most important focus in my work with them. It wasn't just academic, it was more the question of how were they going to live life, this was the deeper concern that I had, and so I think that was the deepest aspect of my service to them, that I became someone who was saw himself as a support for students rather than have someone dictating things to them. Certainly that's how I ended up my days teaching anyway. But as I've said, the evangelisation of youth was the most important thing for the brothers, and so the religious education class was the most important for me. The academic, etc., was very important, but the academic won't get you through life. It's the character that you form, the qualities you possess as a person, the beliefs and attitudes you have that will get you through life. And that's what I felt we were dealing with in religious education. Nevertheless, as I've said, academics were very important, and because my success in academic terms, it gave security for the future for students, and therefore it had to be stressed, and of course students responded most often. There was also then the need for pastoral support, and also the need to challenge students. It was important to seek to impart to students a sense of self-worth, that they were worthwhile, that they were acceptable people, because it's the basis and springboard of their motivation in life. And also, as I said before, I was heavily involved in sport, and I think there are many, many values to be learnt on the sporting field that you can't learn in the classroom. And I think one of the things that I would sort of sought to impart to boys on the sporting field, apart from the skills they need to win the game, was that at the end of the game they should be modest in victory and generous in defeat. So those attitudes were very important in the service that I gave to students.
Thank you, brother. What do you feel are the most important things for a young man to know, learn and live life?
Well, I've said about evangelisation, certainly it says that I would recommend that it's most important to live by your Christian faith. About a century ago, there was a very famous and well-known English writer named Chesterton, Gilbert King Chesterton, who found that it was a convert to the Catholic faith, and it was common for him, particularly in academic circles, to come across people who would say that Christianity was finished. It had been tried and found wanting. In other words, it wasn't good enough. But Chesterton's reply to that was that Christianity had been found all right, but not tried, because it's hard, and people tend to shirk it, but nevertheless it remains central to what you do in life. And hence we should always face the truth, never water down the truth, particularly with regards to yourself. Don't pull the wool over your own eyes. Take responsibility for your actions. And always, even and particularly at this time of your life, you should be seeking a purpose in life. When I say purpose in life, it is to be my vocation in life. In other words, what am I going to do with the gifts and talents that I have? What's a life for? That's vocation. That's purpose in life. And this is when you're raising that question with yourself now and into the future. On this particular point, I'd just like to finish with this rotational statement from Robert Kennedy, the assassinated brother of the president, John Kennedy. He said, each time a person stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the life of others, or strikes out against injustice, they send forth a tiny ripple of hope. And gentlemen, that's one point. Hope is most important in life. He goes on, and crossing each other from a million different centres of energy and daring, those ripples build a current that can sweep down the mightiest floors of oppression and resistance. And the final paragraph he says, moral courage is a rarer commodity than bravery in battle or great intelligence. Yet it is the one essential vital ingredient for those who seek to change the world that yields most painfully to change. So there he says, the utmost importance should be placed upon moral courage, and it's an extremely rare commodity. It's a challenge for you to make it yours. Thanks for listening.
value